ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Well, hello there and welcome back to yet another FileMaker tutorial where we are going to learn some really cool stuff about FileMaker. My name is Matt Petrowski, bringing you these tutorials from my website, FileMakerMagazine.com, where you can always find more information about learning FileMaker. This video is taking a look at how we can take advantage of getting data in and out of a FileMaker database via the clipboard. Doing it super easy. You cannot stop people working with spreadsheets. Well, let's head to my desktop and take a look at the file. All right, thank you for joining me here on my desktop. As you can see, we've got the file, and we are going to be taking a look at a super common situation. As you probably already know, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced developer, we can't get people to stop using spreadsheets even when we create a database system that facilitates exactly what they need to do. This is how it works. People will tend to default to whatever is most familiar or common with them, and spreadsheets, as I have right here, a Google Sheet, and then here is just the numbers. Doesn't matter whether it's Excel. Pretty much all spreadsheets, when you copy what's on the spreadsheet, is coming in some type of standardized format. In most cases, if I select all of this data right here and I copy this, it's going to be in a tab delimited format. Now, a tab delimited format is the native database. It's how data is typically, we copy and paste it. CSV, there's other formats, anything that serializes data, meaning it puts it into all of its little components. JSON is a serialization of data where you're simply just giving a key value to this of first and maybe a key value of last to this. But if it's just the raw data, it's either going to be tab delimited or comma delimited. Now, you may already know this, but if you're newer and you don't, we're just going to work with that. Now, here's what we have. I'm assuming that I've got, let's say user A is over here and they're working in a spreadsheet, and user B is over here. Of course, I would like them to work in the database itself. Just come right in here and make a change. For example, if I wanted Jim Christie, his name, he'd like to be called Jimmy. Well, if we go over to this particular spreadsheet where we've got user B working with this spreadsheet, there it is. It's changed right there. And let's say over in this spreadsheet, this particular person actually changed their name, and it was, let's say it's A.S. Smith. And if it would let me select, which numbers is not going to do in here because it's fine. Take the whole thing off, whatever. We'll just call this Smith at example.com. It really did not want to let me deal with that data by changing it because it had used a formatter. And it tried to open my email application there on the side. All right, so we want to get this data updated. Well, here's what happens. As long as we can say there is a header row that identifies whatever's coming in, it doesn't matter whether the user selected just these two records or whether they selected all of these records. We simply want to make sure that once it's copied to the clipboard, you get over to FileMaker, we click a button, which in this case is this button right here, Get Spreadsheet Data. We bring up a very familiar FileMaker dialog. It allows us to input, which we can input into a variable or a field. So everything that's captured here, we have full control over that. I'll paste the spreadsheet data. And in this particular case, what we've got as an update, watch the A Smith at example.com will change, or should change. No, this is the one with Jimmy. So we're looking at this value right here. Jim is going to update as soon as I click continue, and there it is. Instantaneously, Jimmy is updated. Now I go to a completely different spreadsheet. I'm here in numbers, and I'm going to simply select all of this data. I'm going to copy it, come back over, get my spreadsheet data, same dialog, but in this case, we're going from A.Smith at example, and that's going to update to Smith at example. We can see that right there. And we actually got a second one, and the reason for this is that I'm using the email as a key value. I forgot about that. I should make that update, but let's go ahead and do one more really quickly. Let's just call, he wants to be called Tony now. In fact, this is a good opportunity where we can take all of this data, let's get it out of the way. Let's say that the spreadsheet was being worked on, and the only thing that was copied was this right here. We copy it, we come over to our FileMaker database. We are expecting Anthony right here to convert to Tony. We click spreadsheet data. We've got our dialog. We paste it in. As long as it's in the format that matches what we expect, we can support copy, paste, and import into our FileMaker database. Now, I am doing all of this in memory. Thank you to the MBS plugin. And that's what I'm going to be showing you. You will need the MBS plugin if you're going to be using this particular example. But I want to let you know that this is possible to do natively, but not as easy. FileMaker does have the ability to use its file operations and export file content or data out to the OS as a file and then re-import that using FileMaker standard import. Now, I didn't go through that process in this particular video because I love the MBS plugin. This is one of the reasons that I use MBS, is because it creates a virtual spreadsheet, something that you can work with and do all kinds of cool stuff. Let's take a look at the MBS, how I've implemented, and walk through all of the steps. All right, we are going to dive into the nitty-gritty details of this. First off, you are going to need the MBS plugin. So as I go into FileMaker's preferences, which I did with Command, comma there, the MBS plugin, this is worth its weight for the price that he charges for the amount of features that you have. It's phenomenal. It is basically my go-to plugin, and he just keeps adding more. It is a super, super valuable plugin. You can use it server-side, or you can use it in the client. If you're going to have a widely distributed system, using it server-side is a much easier install because you don't have to manage multiple client installs. But for a developer on the client, it is absolutely wonderful. So in this particular case, what we're dealing with is we're dealing with data that is structured. We have it in, and this is what's great about the MBS. It doesn't care whether you have comma-separated values or tab-separated values. It will split them out, as we will see, using one of the functions. But there's multiple ways to deal with getting the data in. I could very easily have simply just added new records, or I can look for something that is a common key value. Now, that key value doesn't have to be your internal key. So the ID field that I have, which is my primary key for my FileMaker database, typically a user is not going to be working with that. But something that is unique to the user would be an email address. It's used as a login for all kinds of systems. As long as you have something that you know you can match on, we're going to see in the script what we can do. Now, when we take a look at the scripts, there are 3 scripts in this solution: the input prompt, the parse input, and then the copy data. Now, the copy data is super simple. If you don't already know this about FileMaker, I'm going to go in reverse. FileMaker has this one step right there: copy all records. Now, what that means is, and we can also see it when we go up to the edit menu. So on the edit menu, when I have this copy option, if I hold down the option key, you can see that it switches to copy all records. Now, this is a default feature of FileMaker. Whatever data, in terms of the fields that are on the layout, that's what gets copied to the clipboard. Later on in this video, we'll take a look at the process, and I'll talk about this script in particular, but that's the first thing that I wanted to point out. Without using a script or anything, I can hold down the option key and choose copy all records. Now, what happens is every field that's on the layout just got copied. That means that if I did not want my ID included, I would simply just take that off of the layout, and then it would not be copied. So how do you use this in a production environment? Well, typically your UI is going to have some hidden fields that you don't necessarily want copied. You're just going to create a dedicated layout called copy or spreadsheet or, tab data, whatever it is. You go to that layout, copy that's now on the clipboard, and then come back. And as we'll see in this video, all we really have to deal with beyond that point is adding a header, which is the very first row of data, which identifies all of the individual columns. That can easily be done with a global field. So we want to get this data. I mean, that's how we get the data out, which will be pretty much obvious, but we want to be able to get the data in. We want to make it easy so that no matter whether they're working with Google Sheets, numbers, they copy data, they come to FileMaker, they click the button, and we need to parse that data. First, we need to get the input. So let's take a look at the input script. First off, we are going to declare a variable, or I'm just declaring a variable at the top of my script for the purpose of knowing that this is what I'm going to be, where I'm going to be storing the data. So I'm setting it to an empty value. This is going to be my spreadsheet data. Now in FileMaker, you do not have to declare variables. You are able to use a variable anywhere in the rest of your script, any of these steps. But in the case of FileMaker, one of the problems that FileMaker has is a lot of things are hidden. They are not exposed. We can see the word data right here, but this show custom dialog, we can see that when I switch to the input fields, I am using the input field 1, and when I click specify, we can see that quite clearly I am injecting that data into the data from the spreadsheet into a variable called data. And it's that simple. Once it's in a variable in memory, I can do whatever I want to do with it. Now in this case, I am capturing the choice that they make from the dialog, whether I continue or not. If they chose choice 2, that's a cancel. I'm simply going to exit the script and nothing else is going to happen. Otherwise, from this point forward, what you can do is you can take a look and preview the data. Now, in this particular example file, I have not done this, but in the past, using this technique, there are things that I've done. One of the things you can do is set a limit. You can say, I'm going to limit the amount of data that I'm going to process. Now, in order to see how much data you have, you're simply going to use the length function. The length function, and then divided by 1024, and then maybe 1024 again, depending on whether you want megabytes or kilobytes. You can say, I'm not going to deal with, if you paste 1 megabyte of data in, you need to go about that a different way, or 2 megabytes of data. Of course, 2 megabytes of data is nothing in today's world with regards to the amount of memory that we have on devices. Finally, if the data is not empty, that's when we're going to proceed and we're going to run our parsing. Parsing is where we're going to see all of the MBS coolness that does all of the work for us. Otherwise, we're just going to let the person know that they've got empty data. So now that we've taken advantage of previewing the data, and another thing that you can do with previewing the data, something that I've done, is I've looked at the data to determine whether it's tab separated or comma separated. And how would you do that? You would simply just do a count. Let's take a look at what that might look at. Maybe I would have a variable called data type. I would click specify. I'd be working with my data variable, and I might do a pattern count. Let's say I'm going to pattern count across my data, looking for a search string that maybe would be a char 9. Now that is simply looking for how many of the tab characters that I have. And I can say by simply just putting in a logic statement, if it's greater than, and let's say I'm expecting at least 2 rows. You need a minimum 2 rows. So this is where you put in all of your constraints. So if I have a total number, and it all depends on your data. If you're only dealing with 2 columns, count the number of tabs that would be in between however many columns you have. So if I have 3 columns, I'm going to have 2 times 2 rows, which is going to be 4. So long as I have a pattern count on my data of tab characters that exceed 4, I know I'm getting at least what I need to get. And you, of course, could pattern count for commas, for comma separated, for whatever type of data you're dealing with. You're just going to do the whatever you need to do to test that data. Let's throw in an additional condition in this scenario. Let's say I was looking for, and here again, this is a literal tab, which I just inserted. So I put a literal tab versus using the character. There's 2 different ways that you can identify a tab character. I prefer the char because you become familiar with the numbers, and it's a lot easier to read and identify this code rather than what they call an invisible. And we can put on additional conditions. So if I put an and, I can say value count of the data is greater than or equal to 2. So I need at least 2 lines, and that's going to include the header that I need, with a tab character, which I put in there, and maybe another header 2. And then I'm going to have value 1, or value 1, and then value 2. And so that right there is my minimal amount. And this is actually what I do when I program. Literally put the data right here in the calculation when you're working, and just count things up. In this particular case, I would need at least 2. And if I had another field, of course, there I would need 4. All right, so that is how I would preview the data through my input, through my parsing, validate that you're getting what you want, and then I'm actually going to parse, and that's what we're going to take a look at right now. So you find yourself asking the question, where should you host your FileMaker solution? Well, one of those dots right there. That's what I would pick. Now, they didn't come to me. I went to them, and I trust fmcloud.fm with all of my data. They are using the latest tech. In fact, did you know Claris is actually, in some instances, releasing features first and only for Linux. What does fmcloud.fm use? They use Linux. On top of that, they use containerization. And if you've not heard about containerization, then you will be. It's one of the best ways to host your FileMaker solution. I highly suggest that you check out fmcloud.fm. All right, we are at the good stuff. We are using the MBS plugin in order to parse this data. And to be honest, MBS does pretty much all the work for us. We don't have to do a whole lot other than just become familiar with the functions. So I'm going to move the script over here and show you how I actually walk through this process while I'm both creating and editing a script and debugging at the same time, because it's a useful skill to have within FileMaker. I'm going to go up to my tools. I'm going to turn on my script debugger right there. I have a shortcut turned on for that. I've already copied some data to the clipboard. We'll move the debugger down temporarily so I can access the button. I click the button. That is going to invoke the debugger, where I'm going to turn on my ability to step through. I'm going to, and here again, you do not have to step through every single step. So I would be using the step into, the F6 button is what I'm hitting here. But while I'm debugging, I can simply just hit that and then advance this by clicking the run. It will run to the dialog where I will paste in the data. I will click continue. That has now been captured to my data variable. I can always check that by bringing up the data viewer, going to the current tab, scrolling down. And was data actually processed? Let's see, let's make sure sort by the value, and there it is right there. Data I can see by looking at the data variable by double clicking, and I can see that all of the data got captured in here. This is also where you can take the time to modify your data if you're debugging your script directly without having to go and rerun your script again if you want to modify it to see what different result you would get. So advancing the debugger, we're now taking a look at the MBS plugin, and I'm going to go through the individual steps by being able to simply leave the debugger here in the debugging state, but go back over to the script and we can take a look at the calculation code itself. So if we're looking at this, I'm going to drag this down, which is my call stack, down at the very bottom, and I can step through this. Zoom this on screen so that you can see everything that's going on. First off, we are just handing the data from my my input capture into this script. Now, one thing I want you to be aware of is in FileMaker, if you have too much data and you're passing it between scripts, that is a liability that I've come to find out within FileMaker. If you're passing multi-megabytes between scripts, that's not always the best way to go. So there are some situations where if you have a lot of data, you have to sort of work around this shortcoming of FileMaker where it doesn't deal with passing super large amounts of data between scripts as a parameter. And you might want to shove that into a field. And then let's say on the client, you put the data into a field, which then gets moved up to the server. You call a server-side script. On the server side, you then go reference that in order to process it. There are some instances where passing a lot of data via parameters is not a good idea. So we have captured our data from the capture. We're now data. These two custom functions, line endings and call nulls. Number one, you never know what you're getting or where it's been copied from when it gets into FileMaker. Now, FileMaker's roots originally started on the Macintosh side of things, and it uses line endings that are basically just this internal character 13, I believe. But most of the things that you're copying, whether you're on modern Mac OS or on Windows, Windows is going to use carriage return line feed, which I think is 13 and 10, or 10 and 13. And then it's just going to use line feeds or character 10 on the Linux side. So we need to standardize that. And that's what this custom function does. Use the line endings function anytime that you don't know what's coming into your solution, what the line endings are, and this will standardize it to a format that FileMaker actually likes and enjoys. Nulls will also remove any blank or empty lines and also takes special characters and things off of the end. A very cool function. I use it pretty much reliably in most every solution. So we advance this. We need to grab the header. That is the top line. Now this is the core. I'm going to advance it so that we can look at it in the data viewer. We compare our data. We can see that we've got all of our data. Yes, even though it's short, these are tabs in between here. We look at the header, and we've got the header. This is the key. The header is the key that you use in order to determine whether anything goes forward. Now, in this example, in this video, I am showing you that the header value, the value that comes off of what is copied, must be an exact format. But I want you to be aware, I have used this in scenarios and situations where I literally don't care what the order of the columns are, because I will take the opportunity to rearrange them. This is a very big benefit because users will not always get it right. Unless you provide it to them, if they're managing it in a separate spreadsheet, users may have an incorrectly named column, they may have columns out of order, and if you can accommodate all of those things and just get their data in, that's a better way to go. So as long as the column name is what we expect, we don't want the case sensitivity to matter. Ideally, we don't want the order. If email came before first name and last name, I just want to know what column position is email so that I, as the developer, can then move it into the position that it needs to be. In this case, if email was first, I would want to move it to the third position. Now, that's not in this particular technique file because it really depends on the number and type of columns that you're dealing with, but I just want you to know that in this particular case, what we're going to see next, which is the enforcement of what we expect, our validation, you don't have to validate, you can manipulate and put the data into the proper order and just look at, do I have all of my expected columns? So in this case, you can see that I've made a note that we're doing super simple matching expectation. It's also possible to reorder. This is the power. This is why I love MBS. So in this case, what we're doing is we are setting a variable called expected. And what we expect is a first, a last, and an email. And then we are going to do a comparison on that. So in this case, I am using an exact. Now, an exact is case sensitive. If you have to set up as the developer of your solution using this type of technique what your expectations are. And if you're going to reorder, then that's extra code that you're going to have to write. If you're going to not care about case sensitivity, then that's extra code that you're going to have to write. But in this case, I'm using FileMaker's exact function saying if the column names, which right here, you can see I have set up a variable called column names such that it is giving me everything that you must exactly match. So when I take my column names from my header, and then I put them in the same format, meaning I put returns between those, as long as they are exactly the same, then we're okay to continue. So in this case, we can see that the column names that we got did match my expected. So here's what I expected. Here's where I converted the columns from what I got. As long as they match, then I know no reason to run this dialog of an invalid format. Here is where we go through all of the individual functions of the MBS. So if you're an advanced developer, hopefully you advanced to this point because this is where we learn about the matrix. A matrix in the MBS plugin is simply a virtual spreadsheet. It is literally columns in memory that you can do whatever you want to do. Now, the MBS plugin is just blazing fast at doing things with data, and on top of that, it's got a lot of advantages. Number one big advantage is that you can do anything to any column with any FileMaker function that you would normally do in FileMaker itself. Now, in my case, I like the replace field contents, but I would much rather be able to do it in memory, and that's exactly what the MBS allows us to do. So first off, it has matrix.csv split. CSV split, while it stands for comma separated value, does not care whether it's tab separated value. It literally parses out and splits out all of your data. So as soon as I advanced that, that was just done in memory. So I can't see it. There's no way to look at it right now unless I write it back out to a variable so that I can see it, which we're going to see. But here's what happens. A lot of the MBS plugins create in memory a structure that you then reference via an ID. So in this particular case, in memory, the plugin's memory, which is separate from FileMaker's memory, which is nice to know, I have this number. This number represents my matrix. Now, I can do anything to all of this data in memory that I want. I can rearrange the columns. I can make a new copy of this. Just all kinds of stuff. So we're going to see. So we are going to get we are going to grab the header. So when I set matrix header right here, what I'm doing is I'm using the matrix.getRow. Now, in a matrix, in MBS plugin, everything works based on 0. It's like a JavaScript array, which is nice because it's good to get used to that 0-based operation. So the very first row is 0. The very first column is 0. But then you have to deal with this thing where you do this -1 whenever you're getting the height or the width. In this case, I didn't get the height -1 because we're not processing it. You'll see. So look at the matrix header. There it is right there. In this case, you can see that it is lowercased these values as opposed to what I had. And it's also returning them as return delimited in terms of that they have the returns between them. So we're going to get a row count. That row is, there's 5 of them. We've got a row width right there, or a column count. So there is my column count. There is my row count. These values become invaluable in terms of processing the data. And as long as you know where you want to start and where you want to end across this whole matrix all in memory, do whatever you want to do, which we're going to see. Now, one of the most valuable things is that this matrix that I have, I can maintain the original matrix, meaning I don't want to touch it. I want to leave it as a reference because it allows me to compare. So directly manipulating your matrix isn't always a good idea. If you're dealing with a large amount of data, maybe, but if it's a small amount of data, you know, a few hundred K, it's no big deal. Clone the matrix and then manipulate and modify that. So in this case, you can see that I'm creating a variable called clone. I'm calling matrix.clone. Of the original matrix, I now have 2 copies of the exact same thing. And as we're going to see, I'm going to modify one of them. In particular, the very next thing where I remove the header is going to take off that row 1. So in other words, for my clone, I don't want the header. I just want the pure data. I had to have the header in order to compare against up here up at the top in order to make my validation to ensure that what the user was giving me was exactly what my script expects. So when we remove the header, one of the things that is unique about the MBS plugin that I want to point out, this remove header value right here, is that pretty much most of the functions in the MBS plugin return either an error or OK, or they return the data that you're expecting. I like to use FileMaker's way of returning things, which is familiar to me using Linux, where if there is no problem, you get a 0 back, which unfortunately is a false, or the inverse of what we're expecting. We just want to know true, it was successful, typically. So you sort of have to reverse your logic a little bit, and typically on a lot of the MBS functions, what I will do is this remove header, I might name my variable something like header removed in terms of the way that it reads, and I would say value equals MBS matrix.remove clone 0 equals OK. So by doing that, I'm doing my conditional logic in the call to the function, which then sets my variable to a true or false state instead of actually this OK value. And that's just one of the ways that I like to program. But in this case, I'm leaving the OK there because you may like to do it differently. Now, matrix has all of these different options, such as the one that happened right there, the assign names. We can see it got an OK, wherein you can assign all of your columns. You can even assign your rows names, and then you can use those values as part of whatever you're doing with that data in terms of processing it. It just makes it a little bit easier. And the naming of the columns it's a separate value from the actual row itself. So by using this set column names, I didn't set row 0 to be the names like I had when the header came in. This is it's a metadata value about the columns and about the rows, and it's just a convenience feature that you can use. Now, there are a lot of really cool things that the matrix gives you. For example, you can convert all of the data that you copied directly into JSON. You can convert all of the data that you got directly into HTML. It is super, super useful. So as I hit the advance right there, we take a look at the variable that I set, JSON. There is all of my data right there. Although in this particular case, notice that what I referenced in this case was the matrix, not the clone. Had I referenced the clone, because if we take a look at this right there, matrix.json records, I referenced the matrix right here. Had I referenced the clone, I would have just gotten the pure data as copied from the spreadsheet as JSON. Use it in the rest of your scripts. It's there. It's instant. It's free. It's awesome. The HTML, which that one was just set. Let's take a look at that. You can see right here that it will simply take all of your columnar data and put it into a HTML format, ready for you to use within a web viewer. Also note that it does have a variable, which I did not put in here at the very end. You can actually specify some CSS to put onto particular items within that HTML that's generated. Those are just 2 free calls. I mean, the ability to simply just run matrix.cvs split and then matrix.json and instantly have any data copied from a spreadsheet right into a JSON format is just absolutely awesome. It's just 2 function calls. It's really, really awesome. All right, so this is what we're going to do now is we are going to process this data in memory, doing things to it the same way we would if we were using, say, FileMaker's replace function or replace field contents. But the cool thing is we're doing this in memory and it's hyper fast. So let's get this on screen. Add column. We can add a column. Now, this is something that I do in my database systems where if I have a user that's copying and pasting data, I want to know which data had they worked with. So in this scenario, what we're going to see is that I'm actually using the matrix.evaluate. That's where we can run anything that we already know about a FileMaker function across any given column. So by adding a column, what I've done is I've taken the user data and then I'm going to add on a column called updated. And that in my database system is an internal value of simply a timestamp. And it allows me to load or provide features to the end user of, let's load the last set of records that you actually modified and worked with, because I, as the developer, took the time to put on a timestamp value on all of the records that you brought in as part of that copy and paste. Very, very cool stuff. So I add the column with matrix.addColumn. You do need to know what the position and row needs to be. Here's where you use your width against whatever the matrix is. In this case, it's the clone. And then we got this -1 feature right here. We do it for the row and the height. So here is a FileMaker calculation. Note that this calculation is in quotes. So this is not executing get current timestamp into this FileMaker variable. This is going to run this text string as part of the matrix.evaluate, which we can see right here as the calc. So we are running, and you can see that all of my variables, I love to name my variables representative of what is happening. I am adjusting the matrix. So I adjust that. And what happens, we go take a look at that adjust. And yes, where is the adjust? Am I missing it? Did the adjust actually happen? It is here somewhere. I know that it is. Calc. Current timestamp. I don't know why I can't see the adjust. It may have happened. Oh, I've not stepped advanced it. That would help, wouldn't it? Adjust right there. So everything happened okay. The reason that I wanted to show you this is a very critical point whenever you're dealing with a matrix, that you have to check that you're getting an okay because of this right here. Everything within a matrix is specific to FileMaker's data types. Now, when we get this data into the MBS plugin using the matrix CSV split, I believe that the MBS does attempt to look at the data type, but depending on what's on the clipboard. So if I had done a copy all records and put that onto the clipboard, if FileMaker does identify the data type of a column, whether it's a text versus a number versus a timestamp, the MBS plugin does respect this. And when you're going to use the matrix in conjunction with many of the other features that the MBS plugin provides, such as its SQL features, being able to push data into a column or into a table, so the data type matters in a lot of situations, and that's the frustrating part that you can run up against, is if the data is not in the right type. So I wanted to show you, if I zoom in and get this on screen properly, the matrix.convert data type. This is a function that you can use, the matrix function in the MBS, that allows you to convert a data type into any of FileMaker's standard types. And I believe it's text, number, date, time, timestamp, and I don't know if container is there, but you can reference the MBS documentation and you can force it into the type that it needs to be. And this is very important when you're working with the other functions. It's also important that you get the starting position and everything correct. So you can see right here, I've already established the last row up here. I've established the position right here by doing the -1, meaning I want to work on the exact data that I need to work across. And that's the cells that you're going to deal with. So after the data type has been set, this is how you see your data. This is how you see what the result is. Now, you're not going to be able to see any of the styling that is retained. Note that the MBS plugin, it respects all of FileMaker's data types and also the styling that's on the fields. So those two attributes, if you have text data and it has inline text that's bolded versus highlighted versus italicized, all the styles that FileMaker supports, if it's come from FileMaker, or if you've applied it to the data as part of a matrix evaluate using any of the styling functions, that styling comes along with that data. So when we look at the data with the get text in the data viewer, we do not see that. You also get to specify whatever delimiter you want. In this case, I'm specifying the tab character. I could specify anything that separates any type of serialized data. I can even make my own version of the JSON if I wanted to. And so when we hit the preview, we go to that particular variable. There it is right there. Now this is where you're able to, using the preview, make sure if you've done a column reordering where you allow the user to have columns in the incorrect order and you've just, as long as they get the right count, etc., this is where you're actually going to preview that data, is take a look at it, and then if everything's in the order that you want, that's when you're going to be able to do something with it. So that's where we're at in this script. We are at the stage where we're going to do something with the data. I'm going to take a breather and we're going to process that right now. All right, so everything that we learned above was just about getting the data, and now that we've got the data and it's all in the format we want, it's in a clone, now is when we decide what do we do with that data. There's multiple options that you have. You can, number one, use the MBS plugin to simply just put that data back in place and update it, and that's what's called an upsert. You can see right here that I have a variable called upsert. Now there's multiple ways to do this. In this particular case, when I've copied multiple rows, I need to process each of those individual rows. Well, the easiest way to do that is going to be using an internal while function. If you're not comfortable with using the while function within a single variable, then your alternative would be to write a loop statement. So right here where I'm using a single script step, you would in place use a loop function with an exit loop if, and you would have to use a counter and walk across each row doing something to each one of those pieces of data. This is where it's advantageous with the script open. I can't click right here to go into look at the calculation, but I can click over in the script and go over to that actual value. So let me find that. We'll scroll to it, double click on the upsert with the debugger open in the background. No big deal. We can still click in, look and edit the script. FileMaker is going to patiently wait for us, and we can look at this. So within this while function, what we can see is that I am setting up a local variable which is going to reference my cloned data. So this is simply, it's always best to use a local variable rather than sprinkling your script variable throughout all of your code. Because if you decided to change the name of that variable, I only have to change it once here. I don't have to click and change it here, click and change it here, click and change it here multiple times. Always try to be as dry as possible. So in this case, I'm creating a variable. There is my matrix. Then throughout the rest of my code, I can simply just reference matrix, as is the case right there. So I definitely need to work across however many rows there are. I get the matrix height. And here's where I have to break everything down. If you're dealing with a lot of columns, you have to get every single column because we are using one of the MBS functions right now, which is insert or update record, which is known as an upsert in the rest of the database world, because you are either going to update, and if that record doesn't exist and you cannot update, you are going to insert, upsert. So there you go. So here I am actually going to upsert. Now, because I'm walking across all of these records, I need to know at any point in time if I get an error. So how you handle errors is going to be up to you, but there is not necessarily any error handling within this code that's all right here. But you would want to handle an error. There's multiple ways to do that. I have used global variables. I have passed the results back. But one of the ways that I deal with using an MBS function within the contents of a while function is I will simply, many times, collect all of my OKs. So what happens is I end up collecting this string that is something like this. Okay, 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 because that's what the MBS plugin returns. It returns this value of okay. So what I do is I then have actually a function where I say, if the result that I got, which is okay, 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 is equal to, and then maybe I have a repeat function of, repeat okay for however many lines there were. That's one of the ways that I have done this. Because what happens is if you don't have an okay, the MBS plugin will actually return somewhere within there an error of what the problem was with the actual SQL call. This function is running SQL. You can also handle the error in line. Long story short, you absolutely want to know when there is a problem. How you deal with the problem is going to be up to you, how you like to code, and what you like to do. In this case, I'm simply just returning a list, returning the result, which is basically okay, 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 problem, okay, okay, okay. And you would be able to scan that result looking for anything other than okay. There's many, many different ways that you can do this, but in this instance, this is what I like to do. Also, it's nice to know that when you use the FM insert or update record, note that there are multiples. You can do it based on 2 key values. You can based on 3, 4 even, which I have rarely ever used 4, but I have used up to 3 key values. And it's basically the first 3 sets of field references. Those are all of your key values. If they all match, it will update that record. If the record isn't found, it'll insert it. Absolutely brilliant. I love that I can do all of my inserts in one single function. Now that is just the upsert portion of this. This is if you're updating data based on a common value. And in this case, I'm using the email field because I know it's going to be unique across most all users. Alternatively, you can generate and insert the data directly. Right here, we've got an insert, but before we go to an insert, let's say you're working with an external system and users are copying, pasting from spreadsheets. you can very much create a SQL statement. Now, FileMaker itself, its native support does not support the ability to write and update. Of course, you can with the MBS plugin or another plugin, but sometimes you want to see the SQL or use the SQL in another system. Well, if we advance this and we get to, in this case, I'm not going to, this is saying if false, which means it's going to bypass it. Well, let's see how we can walk through it. I'm going to select on this value, and I'm going to click this step right here, the step that allows me to actually see or set the point where my script is going to run. So let's take a look at SQL values. SQL values is using a function called values wrap in order to get the matrix text, but one of the things that we see is on that particular one. We'll take a look at it. You can see that what I am doing is I'm literally putting all of these values and wrapping them around my data into the format that, say, MySQL uses, or many other SQL systems where you would be able to do an insert or an update with multiple value rows. So we look at this, and again, note that this is a very simple example of converting a matrix into SQL values. This is something you have to be aware of the SQL system that you're working with clearly. And if we go take a look at the SQL upserts, you can see that the data that I simply had, I just converted it and put it right into the format that I would need. Every single row is now usable within SQL, where SQL has this option called values, where you would say insert into or update or set values, and then each one of these just all gets inserted with one single SQL statement. Now, of course, you have to fix that up. I would have to take off my trailing comma right there, etc., but you get the idea that you would be able to use this for an external system. In fact, let's advance it one more. Take a look at our update statements. This is what I commonly do in my FileMaker systems, as I use a templating system. So in the case of FileMaker, FileMaker does not support the SQL option of values, unfortunately. FileMaker uses an old SQL 92, so I would have to run multiple updates and cycle through each of these rather than being able to call one single update function, which you can in other SQL systems. But I do this with a templating system. So pretty much I'm always updating into the same table. So if I simply set placeholders, I can now use a substitute on all of these and then use another while function and simply just walk across them. This would be a native way of doing this with standard SQL instead of using the SQL that comes with the MBS. But of course, if MBS is already here, just use the upsert that Christian provides for you. It's absolutely easy, but we're working with external SQL systems. Here is my SQL statement right there. We can see that it got swapped out. All of my tables are correct. All of my values are correct. Values in SQL must be single quoted. And there you go. And you have to be aware that you will need to escape any values that include SQL quotes, which is simply just replacing multiple quotes. Then I would run the update, which in this case I am not going to do that. But again, I would have to use a while function and walk across those. Another option that we have is the super simple and super easy insert records. And so what we're going to see in this particular case, where I am going to set the table name, I'm going to set the field names, and then magically what we're going to see as I move everything off to the side right here so we can look at the data is, again, the MBS plugin, single function calls. It is just one function that says insert records. And those, were they inserted? They might not have been. Let's take a look at that insert, see what we got. There we this won't work because in this particular case, I am dealing with that updated or that third value. My original matrix only has 3 columns. It does not have the 4 columns that it's expecting, so that actually didn't work. We would see a SQL dialog right here, throwing my error, etc. But you make the data right, and it just works. So finally, at the end, what we need to do is, because the whole matrix is operating in memory, you have to release all of these, or if you're working across multiple scripts, know that you still have that memory consumed. You do not want to allow the MBS plugin to accumulate all of these matrices and continue to consume memory. That just eats up memory that you don't need to use. So at the very end, you always release that. And in this case, because I created two matrices, the original matrix and then the clone, I just need to release both of them. And what we're going to see is where we've got, there's my original matrix right there. There's my clone right there. So 80007 and 80008, they need to go away. And that's what happens when they are released. Those are no longer available. And I am back at my calling script, which I'll exit the debugger, and everything is now processed. And like I say, you are able to pretty much do whatever you want. Whether you want to upsert, whether you want to just update, not insert, whether you want to just insert a full set, it is completely up to you, but is absolutely wonderful to be able to copy and paste from spreadsheet data and get it into FileMaker simply and easily. So if you enjoy videos like this, please feel free to check out FileMakerMagazine.com. I've got tons of other content. And as always, I'd like to wish you much luck and happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.FileMakerMagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.